Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Gaming here, back in the video. Today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the Shadow Priest for Season 3 of The War Within. If you want a link to the talents, we're going to leave that in the description below. You can just copy and paste that in, and that will have the exact same talents that we use in this video. Okay, like all my guides, just to kind of preface this, this is a beginner's guide. This is going to be for people who want to take their character up to at least a plus 10 in Mythic Plus. So nothing like super advanced in here. This is just gonna, kind of get you comfortable with kind of the core of Shadow Priest. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So Shadow Priest works off something called Insanity. They have a sort of like a builder spender sort of spec. We don't work off like a combo point or anything. We work off a resource system. And you're going to use certain spells that generate this insanity for you, which you can then in turn spend on more powerful spells. So to give you a very, very just quick example of that, right? We can just come in here and look at our Mind Blast here. We can hover that and you see it generates 6 insanity. So we can come up to this dummy here. We can cast a Mind Blast. You can see our insanity has now gone up a little bit, and now we can utilize that. So different spells generate insanity, different spells use it. That's kind of the core of Shadow Priest. And I want to talk a little bit about some of our main dots. We're kind of a dot-based spec. We're not to the level like an Affliction Warlock is, but we're kind of in a similar spot as like a Balanced Druid in terms of dots. You got a couple that you maintain. So a first core one is going to be Vampiric Touch. This is going to generate insanity. This is going to deal damage. And this is also going to heal you. So the most important part about this really is the insanity that it generates. So the good thing about dots is you can put this on multiple targets. So you can generate insanity by putting your dots on more than just one target. So I can come out here, right? I can put a Vampiric Touch on this guy, on this guy, and on this guy, and I get 4 insanity per cast of that. Now the next spell you need to be worried about is something called Shadow Ward Pain, and pretty much the same thing as Vampiric Touch. It generates insanity for us. It deals damage over time. Nothing too crazy going on there. But it is kind of cumbersome, right, to come in here and have to manually apply a dot to every single target. And then not only that, you have 2 different dots. So we'd have to go through here and target each individual mob 3 times and apply 2 dots. So Blizzard has worked in something called Shadow Crash. So Shadow Crash is very unique, and it's very useful to Shadow Priest because this allows you to apply your dots with just this one spell. So this has an area marker on it. So you see it's on my 1 bar here. And when I cast this, every single one of these training dummies are going to get Vampiric Touch and Shadow Ward Pain applied to them. So you can really take Vampiric Touch off and Shadow Ward Pain off your bars, and that's going to free up some room. And you can Shadow Crash these dummies, and now they get applied all these different dots. Now, by default, Shadow Crash will only apply Vampiric Touch. So the reason that it applies Shadow Ward Pain as well is because we're taking a talent here called Misery, and that allows us to apply 2 dots with 1 cast. Now, one thing to note about your Shadow Crash is you can only apply these dots up to 6 targets. Anything after 6, you're going to have to manually apply yourself. So, you don't necessarily want to move your Vampiric Touch off your bars. Like I said earlier, you want to have it on there somewhere. In case the tank pulls a big pack, you want to dot as many as you possibly can. But for most pulls, you're not going to have to be manually dotting. Okay, up next we have Mind Blast. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. This is just going to be your main insanity generator. This has 2 charges behind it, and this also has a chance to proc something called Shadowy Insight. So your Shadow Ward Pain ticks have a chance to reset your Mind Blast for it to become an instant cast. So we'll take a quick look at what that looks like. So here's a proc right here. We get this sort of purple beam, and we see that we have a proc of Shadowy Insight, and that means our next Mind Blast is going to be instant cast, and we get a free charge of it. So that's what that little purple icon above your head means. Another spell we have is something here called Mind Flay, and Mind Flay is going to, we'll dump a little bit of insanity here so I can show you, but Mind Flay has a chance to turn into something called Mind Flay Insanity. And it's not really a chance, it's every 2 cast of Devouring Plague, and that's going to be due to this Surge of Insanity talent that we're taking here. So all this is just a more powerful form of your Mind Flay. So here's the beefed up version, and then here is your normal Mind Flay. And the reason it's beefed up is because it has a lower cast time, and you'll be able to generate that same amount of insanity in a shorter duration. And then now I want to talk about, we've talked about some generators, most generators. I want to talk about how do you spend insanity. So like, what's the point of it? We're generating all this insanity. What do we do with it? The only way you're going to really be spending your insanity is through something called Devouring Plague here. So let's pull that up. So Devouring Plague requires Shadow Form, afflicts the target with the disease, deals some damage, and heals you for 30% of the damage dealt. So Devouring Plague is strong for a few reasons. Obviously, the dot that it sends out is pretty strong. But it's also strong because it sends out something called Shadowy Apparitions, which we've not talked about this yet. But this procs from your Mind Blast, your Devouring Plague, Void Bolt, and I think that's it. But these Shadowy Apparitions are going to attack everything afflicted by your Vampiric Touch. So that's why it's so important to make sure that you're keeping your dots up, is because when you come in here and use a spell like your Mind Blast, you see these little Shadowy Apparitions will go out and attack anything that has that dot on them. So those are mainly going to be coming from your Mind Blast and your Devouring Plague. So your Generator and your Spender sends out these Shadowy Apparitions. So both of these spells look like single target spells, but they kind of have built-in AOE properties to them as well with the Shadowy Apparitions. So that's one of the things that's kind of confusing. It's like, how am I supposed to do AOE damage on this spec? Well, it's kind of built in to Mind Blast and Devouring Plague. It's not like an Elemental Shaman or a Balanced Druid where you're using Chain Lightnings and Starfalls, and it's very obvious where your damage is coming from. You kind of got to understand how those Shadowy Apparitions work and how you can proc them. And then another thing that's very important about Devouring Plague, which we'll talk about this more here in a minute, but it extends the duration of your Void form. So I have a spell here called Void Eruption. It puts you into this powerful Void form, and whenever you cast Devouring Plague in that Void form, you're going to extend it by 2.5 seconds each cast. So you want to cast as many Devouring Plagues as possible in this form. And then the last sort of core spell I want to talk about here is going to be your Shadow Word Death. So there's not too much to know about this. It generates some insanity, and this will do increased damage to any targets that are below 35% health. So when these targets do drop below that health threshold, you can use this to kind of snipe health pools and sneak in a little bit more damage. Just know that when you do use this, it does kind of backlash, and it does 5% of your own health as damage. You can see I took damage there. So just kind of be careful with that. And then, yeah, now let's talk a little bit about cooldowns and like the Void form and kind of how that works. We've talked about most of the base spells. That's one of the things I love about Shadow Priest is not that many buttons really in terms of your base core spells, but how you utilize your cooldowns is very important. So the main thing you need to know about Void Torrent is Void Torrent by itself is not extremely strong. So just looking at it, it does some channel damage. It does generate a decent amount of insanity. But the reason that Void Torrent is decently strong is due to the tentacles that it spawns through Idol of Cthulhu. So these tentacles are going to channel basically Mind Flays, Mind Seers at your targets. So on your opener, you actually just channel Void Torrent for literally 1 tick. Just enough to get one of your Void Tendrils to come out. And then after that, you cancel it on your opener. Because the whole reason that we are even channeling Void Torrent on our opener is for that tentacle. That's where most of the damage comes from our Void Torrent. And one thing that's interesting about Archon is our Void Torrent actually can turn into a different spell. So we have something here called a Void Volley. So that's going to replace your Void Torrent with something called Void Volley after its initial cast. So Void Volley is not even used in our opener at all, even though we're taking the talent. We're really using Void Volley to get to Idol of Cthulhu. But we do use Void Volley in like our normal rotations. So in our opener, we will clip our Void Torrent until we can get a tentacle to spawn right there. And then you cancel it, and then you go with your normal opener from there. So we'll talk about what that looks like here in a minute. Just know that we do clip this spell sometimes. Okay, up next we have our Halo. So Halo here, you just press it. It does like a boomerang effect, and it will generate some insanity for you as it kind of boomerangs in and out. So not much to know there. We also have our Power Infusion, so a very iconic priest ability here. So Power Infusion is typically going to be used with your Void form. So you can see here, it's on a 2-minute cooldown, and your Void form is on a 2-minute cooldown, or your Void Eruption, excuse me. So you always want to pair those two together. Very, very important. If you're not sure what Power Infusion is, you get a whole bunch of haste when you cast on yourself, and you just cast your spells faster, and you're like basically an improved version of yourself. Generate insanity 20% faster. You deal out your damage 20% faster. Just add 20% to your damage, basically. It's actually probably more than 20%, but very strong ability. And the spell that we have is our Shadow Fiend. So this is going to generate insanity for us, and this is going to be something else that you want to line up with your cooldowns. So you'll notice this is on a 3-minute cooldown, and these are all on 2-minute cooldowns. So you'll have to weave in a Shadow Fiend typically every other go of your cooldowns. And the main reason we're using Shadow Fiend is just for its insanity. That's about the only benefit you get from it. It doesn't do a ton of damage, but just know you want to sync up your Shadow Fiend before you go into some of your major cooldowns. And then finally, we have our Void Eruption here. So Void Eruption is super important to us. And this is the form. It procs something called our Void form. And this is what we want to extend as much as we possibly can with our Devouring Plague cast. So really the goal while you're within Void form is to generate as much insanity as you possibly can and spend that on Devouring Plague to extend the form duration. Now, really what makes Void form so strong is, I'll just go ahead and jump in here and show you, is whenever you go into your Void Eruption, you now have a spell. Your Shift 5 has now turned into something called Void Bolt. And a Void Bolt is very strong because it generates so much insanity for us on instant cast. So Void Bolt is going to be your highest priority spell whenever it is available to use. So anytime that's ready to go ahead and send it. We want all the insanity that comes from that. Now, another reason that Void Eruption is so strong is because, again, like we said, it puts us into our Void form. So our Void form is right here for 20 seconds. So while we're within our Void form, and this is probably the real reason that it's so strong, is our spell damage is increased by 30% and 7.5% increased critical strike. So we want to extend the duration on this as long as we possibly can through more insanity, through more Devouring Plague cast. That way everything just hits harder. Now, we talked about earlier about how Devouring Plague and Mind Blast sends out a shadowy apparition. So does our Void Bolt. And that's another reason that it's very important to cast this on cooldowns. Not just the damage that Void Bolt does, not just the insanity it generates, but also the shadowy apparitions that come out. Okay, so yeah, we've done a lot of talking now. Okay, now let's go ahead and talk about the Shadow Priest opener. Their opener is going to be the following. So you're going to cast Shadow Crash. You get 1 tick on your Void Torrent, and then you're going to go into a Halo. From there, you'll go into a Shadow Fiend or Mindbender, depending on which one you're spec'd into. That's going to give you that high insanity generation. And then we'll also go into our Void Eruption, Power Infusion with any sort of pots, trinkets, any sort of racials that you have. You're going to put this all behind your Power Infusion. And then we go into our very first Void Bolt. And then from here, you will continue on to single target AOE Priority. The opener will look something like this. So you can Shadow Crash, 1 tick of Void Torrent, then into a Halo, then into a Shadow Fiend, into a Void Eruption, then into a Power Infusion, any trinkets or racials that you have, and then into your very first Void Bolt. Remember, you're not going into your Void Volley on your opener. Okay, now let's briefly take a look at your single target priority. And this is just a priority list. And the idea of this is just to give you an idea kind of what you should be focusing on. This isn't necessarily like an end all be all. You have to do things in this specific order. This just gives you an idea of like what's procking and what order should you use those procs, and just kind of put like a hierarchy system into your brain, right? So number 1 priority is maintain your dots, right? Shadow Crash or Vampiric Touch. You want to make sure that you're maintaining those at all times. They generate insanity for us, and your shadowy apparitions do not work without Vampiric Touch applied to the target. So just make sure you always have that up. Then after your opener, you want to make sure you're casting your Shadow Fiend or Mindbender. And really 3 through 6 is literally just your opener. So we can just kind of cross these out because we've already talked about this. So go through your opener. And then now here, this is mainly your single target priority. So from here, you'll be spending insanity on Devouring Plague if it's not active. But anytime that you can press Devouring Plague, go ahead and press it. There's no reason to stack a whole bunch of insanity or to pull a whole bunch of insanity. Next priority is kind of like we talked about earlier with your Void Torrent. You don't want to be casting too many Void Torrents all the way through. You want to cancel them if you do get a Void Bolt that procs or a Devouring Plague that procs. Those are both more important than anything that comes out of your Void Torrent after you get that first tentacle. From here, we want to Mind Flay Insanity if our Devouring Plague is active. From here, we'll go into a Mind Blast, and this is where that Void Volley comes in that we talked about earlier. It's not used in your opener. It's used after you're out of charges of Mind Blast, after You've kind of gone through most of your procs, you've spent your insanity, and then you'll go into your void volley from there. From here, we will be casting Devouring Plague if our Void form is active. Doesn't really change much for us. Devouring Plague is always going to be one of your highest priority spells. Up next, cast Shadow Crash if there's no additional targets to dot or upcoming movement. So you can use this during any sort of movement phases, squeeze out a little bit of additional damage. If there are additional targets to dot, right, then refer to step 1. We'll manually apply Vampiric Touch right here, hard cast Vampiric Touch. You make sure all targets have Vampiric Touch that you can possibly put on. Again, assuming that you'll get that full duration of Vampiric Touch. Step 14, we'll be casting Shadow Word Death. We're going to kind of use this to snipe and execute range. And then we'll use a Mind Flay only as a filler if there's nothing else to press. Now, most of the time, you're just using the improved Mind Flay through Mind Flay Insanity. The outside of that is just during movement, you'll be using Shadow Crash, Shadow Word Death, or Shadow Word Pain. And then for our AOE priority, everything's the exact same. Due to our single target abilities also being our AOE abilities, like our Mind Blast with Shadowy Apparitions and just kind of how that synergy works, it's all the exact same. Your opener is the same. The priority of how you spend your insanity is the same. What you do during movement's the same. Yeah, we'll probably just put this all into one section. We'll just call it the priority section because they are literally the exact same. All right, guys, that's the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.